They heard the crack before they saw the damage. A sharp, dry snap that cut through the noise of the hall, silencing the chants and cheers in an instant. A boy screamed, high, piercing, helpless. Someone in the bleachers clapped their hands over their face. What was supposed to be a light-hearted showcase of karate had just swerved into something darker. The air shifted. Excitement soured into dread. The Los Angeles sports complex had been buzzing all evening. Parents with kids in crisp white Gs had filled the seats, camera phones out, proud to watch their children's heroes in action. Martial arts magazines had reporters in the front rows, notepads ready for feature stories. The place smelled of popcorn, floor polish, and the faint must of sweat baked into the mats after years of training. The atmosphere was carnival mixed with ritual. Families, fans, journalists, all expecting spectacle with just enough danger to thrill. At the center of it stood the night's star, a brown belt karate instructor who carried himself like a celebrity in his own head. Mid-30s, tall, with too much gel in his hair and a grin he flashed too often. He soaked in the crowd's attention, bowing dramatically, tossing sharp glances at the reporters like an actor playing a role. Every gesture said he believed he was more than he was. Not just a teacher, but a warrior. The arrogance clung to him like cologne. He strutted across the mat, demonstrating strikes with exaggerated flair. His voice boomed as he explained techniques, but the explanations sounded less like instruction and more like boasts. He mocked an imaginary opponent, punctuating the act with sly smirks toward the audience. Parents laughed at first, nervous but entertained. The kids leaned forward in awe. He knew how to work a crowd, but not how to respect it. Then he raised his arm and called out a student, barely a teenager, maybe 14, 15 at most. The boy hesitated, glancing toward the rows of parents before stepping onto the mat. He wore a white belt, the cloth slightly frayed at the ends. His hands trembled as he bowed. The master placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing it in a way that looked friendly, but held just a bit too much force. The crowd murmured with anticipation, waiting for the lesson it was supposed to be theater. A controlled demonstration, a chance to dramatize what real fighting looked like. That's how these shows usually went. A staged attack, a careful throw, a practiced counter that made the audience gasp but never put anyone at risk. At least, that's what everyone assumed. The instructor started by circling the boy, barking short commands, daring him to strike. The boy tried a timid kick, more for form than for contact. The master blocked it easily and grinned wide, shaking his head at the crowd. "Weak," he said, loud enough for the microphones to catch. A few laughs rippled, but then he swept the boy's legs with a sudden, violent undercut. The kid hit the mat hard, the sound echoing like a dropped plank. Some parents laughed nervously again, assuming it was part of the show. The boy scrambled up, uncertain, but the man pressed harder. He wrenched the kid's arm into a lock, sharp, cruel, unnecessary. The boy grimaced, lips pressed together to stifle a cry. The audience's laughter died. Tension slid across the room like wind before a storm. And then came the blow. A sudden strike, fast and careless, his forearm slamming into the boy's outstretched arm with too much force. The crack rang out, a sound no one in the hall would forget. The boy screamed, clutching his arm, collapsing to the mat. His face twisted in pain. Gasps ripped through the stands. Mothers shouted. A father leapt up, nearly vaulting the railing before security held him back. A woman's voice shrieked for a doctor. Children cried into their parents' sleeves. Reporters surged forward, cameras raised high. The snapping shutters sounded like rain. The moment was already escaping into the world beyond the hall. What was meant to be entertainment was now scandal. Violence dressed as discipline. The boy lay on the mat, sobbing, his arm bent at a sickening angle. A coach sprinted from the sidelines, kneeling beside him, shouting for paramedics. The hall dissolved into chaos. Some people yelled in outrage, others tried to quiet their children. Others simply stood frozen, eyes wide with disbelief. And through it all, the so-called master stood over the boy, smiling. Not apologizing, not even pretending to regret what had happened. He raised his chin and, with the same booming voice that had filled the arena minutes before, declared, "In a real fight, the weak have no place." The words cut like glass. The parents roared in anger, hurling shouts and insults. Someone in the back screamed, "Shame!" Others booed, long and loud, drowning out the echoes of the boys crying. Reporters scribbled furiously. Social media feeds lit up as phones streamed live footage, the comment sections exploding with outrage. The arrogance in the man's grin did not falter. But in that same moment, as the hall trembled with fury, the camera lenses swung in another direction. People turned their heads, sensing something shift. And that's when someone noticed a familiar figure stepping quietly into the back of the hall. Just wondering, "Where are you watching from? Write it down, bellow." The noise didn't drop all at once. It tilted, like a table losing one leg. Heads turned in a ripple toward the entrance, where a man had stepped in without ceremony. No spotlight found him. He didn't ask for one. He wore a plain button-down, sleeves rolled, a soft jacket folded over his arm like he had expected to sit in the stands and clap politely. For a second, only a few people recognized him. Then recognition moved row to row like a current. "Chuck!" someone whispered, then louder, then shouted, and the name changed the temperature in the room. He didn't stride or square up. He simply stood, scanning the chaos. The boy on the mat, the coach pressing a hand to the kid's shoulder to steady him, the cluster of phones lifted high, the parents squeezed together like a single animal. He clocked the instructor, the posture like a billboard, the grin that hadn't learned the room, and the grin seemed smaller for being seen. A pocket opened in the crowd as he walked down the aisle. People moved without thinking, like making space for an ambulance. Hands reached out, not to touch, but to point, to record. He passed beneath a bank of lights that flickered and hummed. Dust hung silver in the beams. You could smell coffee gone cold, rubber mats warming under feet, the metallic thread of panic that lingers after a scream. On the stage, the instructor lifted his chin as the cameras swung off him and onto the newcomer. Attention, the oxygen he lived on, thinned. He rolled his shoulders, plastered on a wider smile, and tried to command the frame again. "You," he said, stabbing a finger toward the aisle. "Norris, the guy from the movies?" The hall answered for him. A swell of cheers and angry whistles spliced together. Some parents clapped, as if relief had walked in. Others booed, the sound directed at the man on stage who hadn't yet noticed he'd lost the room. Norris stopped a few feet from the mat, close enough to see the boy's hand trembling, close enough to hear the hissed instructions from the coach. "Don't move. Look at me. Breathe." He nodded once to the coach. Quiet acknowledgement. No extra drama. Then lifted his eyes to the instructor. The instructor felt the pull of the cameras and leaned into it. He jabbed a thumb into his own chest. "This is real karate, not Hollywood," he announced, voice booming. "We don't fake it here." The line was designed to get a laugh. It didn't. It bounced off a wall of faces and fell flat on the mat between them. A mother in the third row shouted, "He's a kid." A man closer to the front yelled for medics again, voice cracking. Somewhere a journalist whispered into a phone, "He just said it. Yes, on record." Norris didn't rise to the provocation. He didn't move at all for 3 long seconds that stretched the room tight. His face held something most people hadn't seen on film. No smirk, no sting, no showman's beat. Just a careful, iron kind of calm. The silence spread until it pressed on eardrums. In that quiet, even the buzz of the lights had a shape. When he spoke, it wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "Real karate is to protect," he said, "not to break." The sentence landed like a level put to a crooked shelf, straightened the picture. The crowd inhaled at the same time, a collective intake that made the rafters creak. A few people clapped impulsively. Others stood without realizing they had stood. On the stage, the instructor's smile froze at the edges. A paramedic team shouldered through. Their boots thudded a practical rhythm. One knelt by the boy with a clipped, gentle tone. The other gestured for space, and the crowd obeyed faster than it had all night. The kid squeezed his eyes shut as a splint was fitted. He looked very small. His father had made it to the edge of the mat now, fingers white-knuckled on the barrier, lips moving with words he wasn't saying. The instructor tried to reclaim the center. He stepped back into the light and spread his hands as if presenting a thesis. "Accidents happen," he said, shrugging. "He has to learn." The world won't be soft for him. His eyes flicked toward the cameras, then back to Norris. "And you, if you came to autograph posters, go ahead. We're busy with real work." Booze came heavy now, not the playful kind that events sometimes invite. A few of his own students dropped their eyes. One girl tugged at her belt with shaking fingers, as if it had become too tight. Norris stepped onto the mat. No rush, no puffed chest. He bowed slightly to the space, the way you do when a room has rules. Old habits have a way of taking shape under pressure. Up close, the instructor saw how little he could read in the older man's face. No heat, no fear, just a certainty that left no space for bargaining. The instructor's jaw worked. He threw his voice to the stands again. "You want me to show him?" he called, and the crowd reacted like a storm, halves colliding. "Chuck! Chuck!" some yelled, a plea and a dare at once. Others spat words the microphones couldn't use. The floor vibrated with shoe taps, the noise climbing back toward fever. Norris didn't look at the crowd. He kept his eyes on the man who had broken a boy, and then smiled over it. The look wasn't theatrical. It was an assessment you feel in your spine. When he finally spoke again, it was to the instructor, not the room. "If you want to demonstrate," he said, "start with an apology." A scatter of claps. Someone whistled. The instructor's ears flushed. "Apologize for what?" he shot back. "For showing the truth? For not pretending this is safe? He'll be stronger for it." Norris's gaze dropped to the boy's splinted arm, then rose. "Strength that needs spectators," he said, "isn't strength." The instructor's laughter came too loud, too late. He turned his back to Norris as if to dismiss him, and addressed the audience with palms up. "You hear that? Philosophy." He pivoted fast, eager to catch Norris off guard with the movement, to retake ground with speed, if not sense. "Fine," he snapped. "If you're the guardian of the temple, step in it. Show us the sacred way." 100 cameras blinked red. A teenager in the back stood on a seat to see. The paramedics lifted the boy carefully onto a stretcher. He bit his lip to keep from crying out again. As they passed Norris, the kid looked up through the pain, searching his face for something. Permission, maybe. Norris touched the rail of the stretcher with 2 fingers, a small nod, then returned his attention to the man demanding a stage. The instructor spread his feet, cracked his neck, whipped a quick combination into the air to warm applause from his own echo. "Come on, movie man," he said, bouncing on the balls of his feet. "Step into the reel." The crowd leaned as one organism, drawn forward by a gravity nobody denied now. The hall no longer smelled like popcorn. It smelled like heat and nerves and the inside of a glove. Even the reporters forgot their questions long enough to simply watch. Norris loosened his shoulders once, almost a shrug, and took a single step toward the center of the mat. The instructor smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He thought he was inviting a scene. He hadn't understood yet that a scene was the last thing he was going to get. The space between them felt deliberate, like two men were standing on opposite ends of a fuse. The instructor bounced lightly, flashing grins toward the cameras, selling his nerves as bravado. Norris barely moved, hands low, posture loose, eyes fixed. The contrast itself pulled the crowd forward. "If you're the legend they say," the instructor barked, "prove it." He snapped a back fist into empty air, sharp enough to pop the mic. A few of his students clapped. Others glanced nervously toward the tunnel where the boy had been carried out. Norris didn't flinch. The instructor stepped in fast, trying to clamp a wrist. For a split second, it looked convincing, until Norris rotated his arm a fraction and the grip collapsed like sand. The audience felt the trick deflate. Murmurs rolled through the rows. Annoyed, the instructor surged again. A sweep, a shove at the collar. Norris shifted half a step, and the sweep met nothing. A hand landed softly on his triceps, pinning him for a heartbeat. The older man could have dumped him. He didn't. He let go, and that restraint drew gasps louder than a throw would have. The instructor's smile slipped. He tried a low kick, then a high chop. Both missed by inches, Norris's head moving just enough, his foot lifting at the right moment. The crowd went quiet, the silence carrying weight. Parents leaned forward, not cheering now, but studying. He pushed harder, knife hand, elbow, heel kick, mixing real intent with showmanship. Norris answered with tiny edits: a parry, a shoulder turn, a forearm angled like a wall. The strikes lost their bite. When the heel kick thudded into that wall, the instructor jolted in surprise more than pain. He knew he'd been read. The crowd began chanting, uneven, confused, half his name, half demanding apology. The noise shook the mat. The instructor jabbed a finger at the stands. "You want a show? Here's your show." He lunged at Norris's lapel. What happened next lasted a second, but rewrote the room. Norris caught the lapel first, pivoted his hip, and the instructor's heels lifted slightly. Everyone saw the line of a throw forming, the inevitability of impact, then saw Norris release him. The man staggered half a step and righted himself, face flushed. The choice not to finish drew scattered applause. It spread, hesitant but real. "You see?" the instructor called, desperate. "Controlled!" But the crowd had turned. Their clapping wasn't for him. Norris finally spoke, voice flat, audible only because the hall had gone still. "You started by breaking a child," he said. "Then you asked us to excuse it." The words cut deeper than any strike. Even his own students looked at the floor. Anger took over. The instructor rushed recklessly, swinging an elbow meant to prove something. Norris moved first. His forearm caught the strike mid-arc, his other hand folding the wrist into a helpless angle. A single fingertip hovered at the hollow under the jaw. He didn't press, but the threat was visible to every eye in the room. The arena exhaled together. Parents clapped hard now. A girl in a white belt smacked her palms, then covered her face, embarrassed. Too late. The applause spread. The instructor tried humor. "What's next?" You'll bow me into submission." His grin looked brittle. Norris actually bowed, a small one, not to him but to the mat itself. When he straightened, his voice was almost gentle. "You can stop," he said, "or keep proving what everyone already knows." The words landed heavier than any punch. The crowd was ready for more, but the air had shifted. The boy was gone, the stretcher out of sight. Yet his cry still echoed in memory. The cameras zoomed close on the instructor's face, catching the flash of panic behind his smirk. And then he stepped forward again, refusing to let the moment close. His hand rose for another hard grab, exactly the opening Norris had been waiting for. The hall no longer felt like a sports complex. It breathed like an arena. Journalists pushed closer with cameras held high, the shutters flicking like insect wings. Teenagers tried to start chants, their voices cracking into raw noise. Parents leaned forward on the rails, some shouting encouragement, others warnings. What had begun as a demonstration now pulsed like a real fight, rules dissolving under adrenaline. The instructor sensed his grip slipping. Too many eyes had turned to Norris. Too many voices carried his name. Rage crept into his tone. "I'm not afraid of legends," he shouted, stabbing a finger at the older man. "Right here, right now, I'll show you Norris is nothing but a story." The declaration ricocheted off the walls. Boos collided with cheers. Whistles slashed through applause. The crowd was split, but everyone was on edge, feeding off each other's breath. Norris said nothing. He simply undid the buttons of his shirt and set it on a chair. Underneath, a plain T-shirt. No flourish, no flex. He stepped onto the mat, slid one foot forward, and raised his hands, not theatrically, but in a stance that said he was ready for something more serious than showmanship. The instructor struck first. A skipping kick cut the air toward Norris's midline. The older man shifted half a step, and the strike missed clean. A roundhouse followed, heavy, meant to bruise. It smacked against Norris's forearm and died there. The instructor snapped a calf kick, sneering as it landed on empty space when Norris lifted his lead leg a fraction. The older man's calm made the misses feel louder than any strike. Murmurs swept through the stands. Parents whispered, "He's reading him." A reporter muttered, "Footwork," forgetting the mic was live. The crowd had turned into a single organism, gasping and groaning with each exchange. The instructor came harder, jab, elbow, ridge hand, trying to corner him. Norris closed the space with a palm against the triceps, a shoulder lean that stole momentum. Then, a short body shot, sharp but measured. The crowd erupted at the restraint, clapping as much for the control as for the impact. Sweat beaded on the instructor's forehead. He barked toward the cameras, voice ragged. "This isn't philosophy. It's fighting." He lunged with a wild right. Norris let it slide off his shoulder and answered with a straight jab that snapped his head just enough to draw gasps. It wasn't devastating, but it was exact. And the difference showed. The crowd fed on the contrast, one man exploding with noise and motion, the other moving like geometry, precise and spare. Parents shouted, "Stop it!" while teenagers screamed, "Go, Chuck!" The tension braided fear with excitement. The instructor's anger turned reckless. A sidekick snapped high, sloppy but dangerous. The entire hall inhaled as it passed within inches of Norris's head. Without pause, Norris angled off, checked the landing foot, and posted a forearm across the chest. Assertive, but not cruel. For a heartbeat, he could have finished it. He didn't. The choice echoed louder than the attack. Every sound in the room sharpened. You could hear sneakers squeak, the hum of the lights, even the faint creak of the rafters. The crowd no longer cared about show. They wanted to see if discipline could hold against fury. The instructor tried one last surge. Inside low kick, looping overhand, desperate hook. Norris absorbed each in order, shin to shin, shoulder deflection, hard forearm block, and answered with two short shots, quick and deliberate. A cross brushed the cheekbone. A hook touched the ribs. Small, efficient, undeniable. The instructor flinched, his eyes watering, pride cracking under control he could neither match nor dismiss. The crowd roared in recognition, one man chasing attention, the other dictating the truth of the mat. By now the complex sounded like a storm. Every breath and shout rattled the space. The instructor's face was hot, his movements jagged, pride dragging him forward. He threw another high kick, reckless and close. The room groaned together at the danger. Norris lowered his chin, his feet settling in a stance that promised more than defense. The cameras zoomed close. The journalists stopped scribbling. Even the security by the tunnel froze, sensing that the next exchange would not be performance. It would be decisive. The instructor inhaled sharply, gathering for another rush. And the crowd, leaning forward as one body, knew the storm was about to break. The storm came exactly as the crowd expected, only sharper. The instructor's kicks cut heavier now, his arms whipping like blades without aim. He no longer looked like a teacher, just a man chasing control he had already lost. His strikes slammed into the mat and guardrails with sounds too violent for a demonstration. The audience shrank and swelled with each miss. Mothers covered children's eyes, while younger fans howled as if at a prize fight. The air itself felt hostile, thick with breath and sweat. Norris's movements changed with the danger. He no longer offered space for drama. He economized further, each step closing angles, each block exact. A kick aimed for his temple glanced off a raised forearm and crashed into empty air. A spinning fist hissed by, brushing the air where his head had been. The difference was becoming visible to everyone. One man throwing himself into chaos, the other trimming chaos down to inches. Then came a strike that landed too close. A wild roundhouse, high and reckless, tore through the pocket and passed within an inch of Norris's jaw. The sound of air ripping made the arena gasp as one body. For the first time all night, people felt the possibility of blood. Shouts erupted. "Stop this!" a woman near the front screamed. Others countered with, "Finish him, Chuck!" The atmosphere split open, half fear, half adrenaline, no middle ground left. The instructor saw the panic as fuel. His eyes burned, teeth bared. He threw another combination, reckless, low kick, elbow, a shove at the face. Norris checked, turned, and absorbed without giving back. But the storm pressed harder. And then, from the edge of the mat, another voice broke through. A boy, barely 12, hair damp with sweat, bolted past security. He was one of the students, a friend of the boy carried out earlier. His voice cracked as he shouted, "Stop! This isn't karate!" His small frame planted between Norris and the instructor, arms spread like a barrier too thin to hold. The arena froze. The boy's cry echoed into silence. Even the instructor hesitated for half a breath, then shoved him. Hard. The boy stumbled, nearly falling. Gasps turned into roars. Someone yelled, "Get him out!" Another voice cracked, "Animal!" But before the boy could hit the ground, Norris moved. His hand shot forward, intercepting the instructor's arm mid-swing. A twist, precise, not brutal. Just enough to lock the joint and halt the motion. The instructor's body jolted like he'd collided with a wall. The crowd erupted again, but this time the sound was different. Raw relief tangled with fury. The cameras caught it perfectly. The aggressor stopped cold, his hand trapped, his face twisted in frustration. For a moment, nothing else moved. The boy was helped off by a security guard, eyes wide with both fear and awe. The instructor wrenched against Norris's grip, but it was useless. He was caught, frozen in place by a control that looked effortless. And then came the eyes. The instructor's face flushed crimson, his jaw tight, veins rising in his temples. He stared like a cornered animal, seething, desperate to break free. Norris's gaze, by contrast, was steady, cold as iron. No anger, no triumph, just judgment. That look traveled through the arena, pressing into every seat. Silence fell again, but it wasn't fragile this time. It was weighty, oppressive. People held their breath. Cameras zoomed close. Everyone knew something irreversible was about to happen. The instructor snarled, twisting, snapping words the mics couldn't catch, his body trembling with rage. Norris's grip held, unshaken. He didn't blink. He didn't speak. The crowd understood. This wasn't a show anymore. This was the second before the breaking point, and they all waited to see what would happen when the storm finally tore loose. The grip shattered momentum. Norris twisted just enough to lock the joint, then released, guiding the arm down without violence. The instructor stumbled, caught himself, and exploded in fury. His roar carried through the hall, and he lunged again, not as a martial artist, but as a man cornered. The attacks came wild, an overhand from the hip, a knee slashing for ribs, a high kick reckless enough to hit anything in its path. The audience gasped with each strike, the arena swaying like a storm-tossed ship. Security edged closer. Reporters froze behind their cameras. Norris didn't match rage with rage. He let the rush expose itself. The punch brushed past his shoulder. The knee clanged against his forearm. The kick carved air, spinning its owner off balance. Each time Norris touched only where he had to, elbow, wrist, shoulder, small corrections that made power collapse in on itself. The instructor tried again, pride dragging him forward. Norris's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Feet planted, chin tucked, shoulders squared. The mood changed instantly. The crowd felt the air go colder. Even those who had screamed for blood fell quiet, sensing the moment had become final. The instructor shouted an insult, charging with his head low. Norris moved a fraction to the side, caught his arm, turned his hips, and drew a clean circle. Gravity did the rest. The instructor went down hard but not broken, folded neatly onto the mat. Norris pinned the motion with his knee, hand hovering near the jaw, a position that spoke of violence but stopped short of it. The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the whir of a camera lens, the scrape of a shoe against the bleachers. The man on the floor gasped for air, realizing what could have happened if Norris had chosen to finish. Norris looked at him steadily and spoke in a voice that carried through the hall. "You could have been a teacher," he said. "Instead, you chose to be a butcher." The words rang like a bell. Applause rose slowly, then swelled into a wave. Parents stood, clapping hard. Children joined, wide-eyed. A man near the front shouted, "That's karate!" and was drowned out by the surge of sound. For a few seconds, it felt like the entire hall was united. Norris stepped back, letting the man rise if he wished. He did not gloat, did not raise his arms. He simply picked up his shirt, folded neatly on a chair, and pulled it on. The instructor slapped away the hand offered to him and got up alone, face blotched red. Cameras zoomed in mercilessly. For a moment, it looked like it might end there. Then the instructor staggered to the center, chest heaving, and screamed, "This isn't over! Do you hear me, Norris? I'll be back. I'll show you all what's real." The declaration cracked through the arena, half drowned by cheers, half mocked with boos. His own students shifted uncomfortably. A few turned their faces away. The words sounded less like defiance than desperation, but they carried nonetheless. Norris didn't answer. He glanced instead toward the stretcher rolling back into the hall. The boy, pale but upright, sat with his arm in a splint. Norris raised 2 fingers in a small salute. The boy straightened, wincing but proud. The applause returned, gentler this time, filled with something heavier than excitement. Respect. Security cleared a lane. Norris walked calmly to the exit. At the edge of the mat, the younger student who had tried to intervene earlier whispered, "Thank you." Norris rested a hand briefly on his shoulder. "Take care of each other," he said, then stepped into the tunnel. Behind him, the instructor was still shouting, his voice ragged. "Norris! You hear me? This isn't the end." He jabbed at the cameras as if trying to drag them back. "I'll be back." Phones rose, capturing the last flashes of rage. The crowd, though, was already shifting toward the exits, their voices low, their faces marked by what they had witnessed. Some looked shaken, others inspired. Many walked in silence. When the door closed behind Norris, the applause faded. The arena smelled of sweat and dust again. Ordinary. Yet the mat in the center still carried the shape of what had just happened. Everyone who stepped around it did so carefully, as if afraid to disturb the trace of truth left there.